The iPhone 17e is back in the news again, and this time it's because of a suspicious new Geekbench leak that's raising more questions than answers. On paper, it looks like Apple's next budget iPhone just got a big RAM upgrade and some decent benchmark scores. But when you dig deeper into the details, this iPhone 17e Geekbench listing starts to look a lot less convincing. So in this video, I'm breaking down exactly what this iPhone 17e leak claims, why a lot of it doesn't add up, and what we should realistically expect from Apple's next budget iPhone. If you've seen headlines about a 10GB RAM iPhone 17e with next-gen performance, stay tuned, because there are some major red flags here. Let's start with what the Geekbench 6 leak actually shows, according to a listing shared by leaker Abhishek Yadav on X, formerly known as Twitter. A device with the identifier iPhone 9911 was tested on Geekbench 6. Most leakers are tying this codename to the upcoming Apple iPhone 17e, which is expected to sit in the budget or entry-level spot in the iPhone 17 lineup. Earlier, rumors have suggested that the iPhone 17e might use a binned version of Apple's A19 chip. A binned chip basically means a slightly cut-down variant of a flagship processor, lower clocks, maybe a disabled core or two to keep costs down, while still delivering decent performance. So far, that story kind of lines up. The Geekbench 6 results show a single-core score of around 2,560 points, a multi-core score of around 8,553 points, device reportedly running iOS to 6.1, and here's the big one, 10GB of RAM on the surface. Those scores look fine, respectable, even for a mid-range iPhone powered by a binned next-gen chip. And going from 8GB of RAM on the iPhone 16e, as previous rumors have suggested, to 10GB of RAM on the iPhone 17e sounds like a meaningful upgrade for multitasking, gaming, and long-term performance. But that's only if this leak is real, because when you look closely at the details behind this iPhone 17e Geekbench listing, things start to fall apart quickly. Let's talk about the red flags. First, the base clock frequency. The listing shows the chip running at around 3.76 GHz. For a supposed next-generation Apple A19-based processor, that's surprisingly low, especially when you consider Apple's trend of pushing clock speeds and efficiency forward every year. While clocks alone don't tell the full story, this number doesn't quite line up with what you'd expect from a brand new Apple Silicon generation powering even a budget model. Second, the device identifier, iPhone 9911. Apple's internal device naming usually follows a pattern that can be traced across generations. While we don't always know the exact mapping ahead of time, this identifier doesn't match the structure and logic of other recently known Apple codenames and model numbers. When a supposed leak shows a device ID that looks out of place, that's a strong hint that something might be spoofed, misreported, or tied to a different prototype altogether. Third, the motherboard name in the listing reportedly doesn't match any known or recently leaked Apple logic board codes. Geekbench entries often expose board identifiers that can be cross-checked with past leaks and teardowns. In this case, the motherboard reference doesn't line up with anything we've seen tied to Apple's current or upcoming hardware, which again makes this iPhone 17e Geekbench score look questionable. And there's more. Community comments have also pointed out that the listing appears to show 8 cores for this chip, when current expectations for Apple's mid-tier binned processors suggest a different configuration, typically 6 high-performance and efficiency cores combined in various ways, not a random 8-core config without proper documentation. Could Apple change that? Sure, but combined with all the other inconsistencies, it makes this leak look even more suspicious. Then there's the 10GB RAM claim. Yes, it sounds exciting. Budget iPhone with 10GB of RAM. But context matters. Apple has historically been conservative with RAM, even in Pro models, relying heavily on tight software optimization rather than throwing huge memory at the problem. A modest bump from, say, 6GB to 8GB or from 8GB to 10GB isn't impossible, especially by the time we hit the iPhone 17 generation, but pairing that with odd benchmark identifiers, an unfamiliar motherboard name, and unusual core and clock details makes it more likely that this RAM figure is either misread, spoofed, or belongs to a completely different prototype device that's being mislabeled as the iPhone 17e. So what are we dealing with here? Most likely, A spoofed Geekbench result where someone has modified system identifiers to make it look like an upcoming iPhone 17e or a genuine prototype, but not the retail iPhone 17e, possibly an internal test device, a different model, or early hardware running experimental firmware. This is why it's so important not to take every synthetic benchmark leak at face value, especially when we're months away from launch. Geekbench leaks are notoriously easy to fake. All you really need is a device that can run the app, some basic tools to edit system identifiers, and a willingness to post screenshots online. There's no built-in truth detector in Geekbench that confirms the device is actually what it claims to be. The app just reads whatever the operating system reports. If that information is modified or comes from prototype hardware, the listing becomes extremely hard to verify. So where does that leave us with the iPhone 17e? Let's talk about what we can reasonably expect from Apple's next budget-tier iPhone based on Apple's past behavior and the broader leak ecosystem. Rather than just one sketchy benchmark, Apple's or budget lineup typically reuses or slightly modifies existing chipsets rather than debuting major new silicon. A A19 or slightly underclocked variant is highly plausible, but its performance should still feel consistent with Apple's usual standards, focuses on value and longevity rather than cutting-edge specs. That means good battery life, strong single-core performance, and stable day-to-day use, not necessarily chart-topping benchmarks. Keeps RAM modest but sufficient. If the iPhone 16e is indeed sitting at 8 GB in the leaks and speculation, the iPhone 17e could realistically stay at 8 GB or move to 10 GB, but that alone doesn't prove this particular Geekbench listing is real. So instead of latching onto this one Geekbench 6 screenshot, it's smarter to wait for multiple independent leaks that reference the same device identifiers and board numbers, look for supply chain reports that mention RAM configurations, storage tiers, and display suppliers, and pay attention to consistent patterns across different sources rather than a single and verified test result. The bottom line is this: yes, the idea of an Apple iPhone 17e with 10 GB of RAM and a A19 processor sounds exciting for a budget iPhone. And yes, the Geekbench scores shown in this leak aren't terrible for a mid-range model, but the combination of a strange device identifier, an unfamiliar motherboard name, an odd core configuration, a lower-than-expected clock speed, and a conveniently rounded RAM figure should make you extremely skeptical. Right now, the safest way to look at this iPhone 17e Geekbench 6 leak is as interesting, but not reliable. It's a conversation starter, not a spec sheet. So if you're considering buying a new phone and you're wondering whether to wait for the iPhone 17e, don't base that decision on this one questionable benchmark. Instead, watch how future leaks evolve. If multiple reputable sources start repeating the same details about the iPhone 17e's RAM, performance, and chipset, then we'll have a much clearer picture. Until then, treat this iPhone 17e leak as exactly what it is: a single shaky data point in a long leak cycle, not a confirmed look at Apple's next budget iPhone.